As you watch the next two segments on World War I, keep these questions in mind.
Why did World War I become the first global war in history?
What impact did new technology and industrialization have on the war?
For hundreds of years, large empires had spread out across Europe. At the turn of the 20th century, many people within these empires felt like outsiders. Have you ever felt like an outsider?
I feel like an outsider rather often.
I've changed school systems 3 times now, so every time right at the beginning, right when I come, I feel like an outsider.
Oh, when you first come to a new school, especially like at 7th grade, everybody has their own group of friends, and it was really tough for me to fit in.
I got picked on a lot.
I was always on the outside of the popular group.
I think I felt most like an outcast when I moved to Japan, and it was hard. It's different than just changing schools in America. Like, it's, you know, I was in a whole new country.
In middle school, because in my group of friends, I was the only non-Caucasian person.
I grew up in Nigeria, and then when I came over to America, I went to an all-white school.
When you're younger, you just want to have friends, and I guess I unintentionally pushed my culture away just because I thought it would make it easier.
Until the 1900s, Russia was an empire ruled by a czar, or king. All czars came from the same family, the Romanovs, and they had ruled for 300 years. The czars created a society in which the rich landowners lived a life of luxury, while the workers and peasants struggled to survive. But at the turn of the 20th century, the people began to cause problems for the czar. Why did the people cause problems for the czar? Through the years, the Russian Empire had expanded to control a huge area of Europe and Asia. Because it was so large, the empire was now home to people of many different ethnicities, religions, educations, and wealth. All these people want different things. Some want land, some want more freedom, some want government reforms. These demands soon become a threat to the rule of the czars. Sometimes the czars give the people what they ask for, like giving local assemblies control over schools and roads. But more often than not, the czars oppress the people. An example of this oppression is Tsar Alexander III's program of Russification, launched in the 1880s. What is Russification? The Tsar insists that everyone speak one language, Russian, and have one religion, the Russian Orthodox Church. It is official religious and ethnic persecution aimed at building a common national identity. The Jewish populations in Poland and the Ukraine are particularly singled out and often attacked. Many Russian Jews become refugees and flee the country for Europe and the US. Most Russians at the time are serfs, laborers bound to the land and to the masters who control them. The masters, who are mostly rich landowners and nobles, make up only a small part of the population. It has been this way for centuries, but beginning in the late 1800s, many enlightened Russians know that serfdom is bad for the country and want to get rid of it. What is the main obstacle to change in Tsarist Russia? The Tsar's rigid social structure stands in the way of progress. The Tsars believe that if they change the way Russian society works, it will undermine their absolute rule. So as much as possible, they try to keep everything the way it is. The rich stay rich, and the poor stay poor. And the empire falls further behind its rapidly modernizing neighbors. It soon becomes clear that Russia is a backward empire that needs to industrialize in order to survive. Pressure from students and liberals forces Tsar Alexander II to set the serfs free in 1861. Many peasants moved to the cities, taking jobs in factories and industry. But instead of finding a better life, they find overcrowding, poverty, and disease. More reforms are called for. During the Russo-Japanese War of 1904, the Russians suffered defeat after defeat. Although supportive at first, the people lose morale and blame the Tsar for the losses. Protesters flood the streets, workers go on strike, and liberals call for a constitution to overhaul the corrupt, ineffective government of the Tsar. On January 22, 1905, a group of people loyal to the Tsar marched through the streets of St. Petersburg towards the Winter Palace. Fearing the marchers, Nicholas II calls in troops. The troops open fire on the crowd, killing hundreds. Known as Bloody Sunday, this event starts the Revolution of 1905. In the months that follow, riots spread across the country. In some cities, workers take over the local government. Peasants revolt and demand land. Minority nationalities call for self-rule from Russia. At last, Nicholas II is forced to announce sweeping reforms. He also agrees to the establishment of a Duma, an elected national legislature. In his October manifesto, the Tsar promises freedom of person, conscience, speech, assembly, and union. These reforms win over the moderates and restore order to the empire, but the Tsar remains in control. After the Duma meets for the first time and criticizes the Tsar, he dissolves it and appoints a conservative prime minister who will do what he wants. Although some reforms follow, those who had been in power before the revolution remain in power, the Tsars. But it will only be a matter of time until the revolutionaries in the factories and cities rise up again. Did you know? When World War I broke out, many industrial inventions were used for fighting for the first time. One of them was the airplane. Prior to the war, airplanes had only been used for scouting missions. It was during World War I that they were first equipped with machine guns and turned into fighter planes.
One of the causes of World War I was the complex web of alliances between countries. Once the fighting started, these pacts pulled them, one after the other, into the war.
Have you ever made a pact with someone?
Of course I've made a pact with someone, like my best friends, you know. Secrets, it's a big thing between girls. I've made pacts with a couple of friends not to tell people they have crushes on.
I made a pact with my friend that we were going to succeed in school and go to an Ivy League college.
You have to sign the honor code for the school, and if you go back out of your agreement with them, then they can kick you out.
I have made a pact with my brother when we went to college that I wouldn't grow apart because I wouldn't be seeing him a lot.
If I get all A's, I get a dirt bike.
We sort of have an unspoken pact with my parents that if we get good grades, we get to choose a restaurant that we want to go out to.
I have a pact with my parents. Basically, if I don't do well in school, I get in trouble.
In 1914, Europe had been at peace for 40 years. Industrial development had allowed Berlin and other cities to enjoy massive growth. But economic rivalries, imperial competition, and rising nationalism were spreading across the continent, and militarism the glorification of the military was growing. The great powers expanded their armies and navies. The result was an arms race that only aggravated the mistrust countries felt toward one another. Distrust of each other led the great powers to sign treaties pledging to defend one another if they were ever attacked. These alliances were intended to create powerful combinations that no one would dare attack. Gradually, two huge alliances emerged. The Triple Alliance of Germany, Italy, and Austria-Hungary, and the Triple Entente of France, Russia, and Britain. The growth of these rival alliances increased international tensions even more. How did World War I start? These tensions erupted with the assassination of Archduke Francis Ferdinand of Austria during his visit to Serbia on June 28, 1914. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. Because the alliances were in place, a chain reaction occurred, and the major powers began declaring war on one another. Germany invaded France through neutral Belgium. Because of this action, Britain joined forces with the French against Germany. The Western Front was born. Why was it called the Great War? Newspapers soon began calling it the Great War because it was the largest conflict the world had ever seen. The French mobilized 8.5 million men, the British 9 million, the Russians 12 million, and the Germans 11 million. It lasted for 4 horrible years. When the war started, people were full of enthusiasm and patriotism. Young men rushed to enlist, and crowds cheered them. But their enthusiasm was short-lived. This was a new kind of war, far deadlier than any fought before. On the Western Front, the warring armies made a vast system of trenches stretching from Switzerland to the English Channel. Between the enemy lines was no man's land, an empty stretch of ground filled with bomb craters and barbed wire where no soldier could survive. How did technology change the war? Military tactics had not changed for 100 years, but weapons had made the leap into the 20th century. There were new inventions like machine guns that could fire hundreds of bullets in a minute. Now a single defender could wipe out a whole troop of oncoming soldiers. Artillery could bomb enemy encampments from miles away. The new factories back home could pump out new weapons at an unheard-of rate. And now science, previously seen as a sign of progress, was used for killing. Chemical warfare was also put into use. Poison gas, capable of blinding or even killing, was now part of a soldier's arsenal. What was life like in the trenches? Soldiers in trenches lived a primitive life. They fought, ate, and slept in the trenches. There was no proper sanitation. Fear, hunger, thirst, and cold were constants, and death was all around. The huge losses of life and the prolonged nature of the war had a profound effect on the soldiers and the people back home. No one had predicted how devastating the war would be, or how it would change the way the world looked at war.
You've been given all the information. Now it's your turn to discuss the questions. Take a moment to talk about the following.
Why did World War I become the first global war in history?
What impact did new technology and industrialization have on the war? If you'd like to learn more about what you've just seen, go online or check out these books at your local library.
As you watch the next two segments on World War I and its aftermath, keep these questions in mind.
How do the feelings of the people back home affect a country's war effort?
How did the war contribute to instability in some countries?
To boost morale, the countries involved in World War I turned their successful fighters into celebrities and heroes. And no one was more famous than the German pilot nicknamed the Red Baron.
Who is your hero?
I'd have to say that my hero is Steve McQueen.
My passion because he's given me so much insight on how to live life.
The Indigo Girls, pretty much because they're total babes.
My hero would be Lance Armstrong, through his fight through cancer and then still being able to win back-to-back Tour de France's.
I would say my mom's my hero. My mother is my hero because of the wonderful values she has instilled in me.
I think Gandhi is one man who has affected many lives.
Lisa Simpson.
Nicole Kidman.
The man who stood in front of a line of tanks in Tiananmen Square.
Martin Luther King Jr. because of all he's done for America and like the changes he made and the amount of people who followed him.
My dad is my hero. Ever since I was little, my dad was the one who, taught me how to play sports.
I think he's doing pretty well, and I want to just follow in his footsteps.
World War I was a time when legends ruled the skies.
Was filled with a sense of invincibility.
This one legendary pilot was more feared and respected than any other, Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron.
April 21st, 1918, just a few feet from this spot, Manfred von Richthofen took his last breath.
Amazingly, the unbeatable German ace, the menace of the skies, was finally shot down over France by a single bullet.
Who fired the bullet that killed the Red Baron?
After more than 80 years, historians are now finally able to solve the mystery.
Fire!
World War I feels like ancient history. But one man's name lives on from that war. Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron. In 1918, he was Germany's picture postcard celebrity. A 25-year-old aristocrat, the leader of a crack squadron of pilots that terrorized its Allied rivals. He was an expert flyer, a skilled marksman, and so confident of his abilities that one day in 1917, he painted his plane a bright shade of red as an invitation to his enemies to try and shoot him down. Many tried to beat the Baron, and all of them failed. His legend grew with each victory.
Manfred was a star. He became a star because the high command needed success, and they didn't have much of success on the ground. So they made these pilots heroes.
Von Richthofen shot down 80 planes in dogfights, or mid-air plane battles, more than any other pilot during the war. But on April 21st, 1918, the Bloody Baron finally became a victim himself. The day he was shot down, a mystery began. Who shot the Red Baron? More than 80 years later, the mystery remains. There aren't many survivors from World War I still around, but one of them lives in a quiet town in Queensland, Australia.
The front itself was pretty grim. Water in the trenches. The rats were as big as cats. You were never afraid of shells or bombs.
Now 104, Ted Smout served in the Australian Army Medical Corps during World War I. He witnessed countless deaths in that terrible war. Today, only one stands out. Smout is the last living eyewitness to the events of April 21st, 1918. He saw the Red Baron shot down and witnessed Germany's greatest ace take his last breath.
Oh, it was a clear day. We were out in a rest area, less than a kilometre behind the line. We were actually making a cup of tea. We could see these planes having a dogfight up above the front line, and then a couple of them peeled off. We saw this red triplane coming down.
Smout caught sight of the plane only because the Baron had made a serious mistake. He chased a British plane into Allied territory. All of a sudden, von Richthofen flew into a storm of bullets.
Made a fairly good landing, but when he landed, it slewed round to the right.
To this day, what sticks in Smout's mind most is the nature of the Baron's fatal injury.
Everyone was having a pot shot. That was the amazing thing, that he only got one bullet.
Scores of shooters, thousands of bullets, but only one shot hit the Baron. Who fired it? Many differing accounts of the events of April the 21st exist, but these are the facts. Around 10:45 a.m., a dogfight erupts over German lines between two squadrons, one Allied group and the Red Baron's group, nicknamed the Flying Circus. Lieutenant May, a young Canadian pilot on his first combat mission, breaks away from the pack and starts running. 10:55, the Baron gives chase. The Allies flew Sopwith Camel biplanes, which were faster than the Fokker triplanes of the Germans. But the German planes were easier to maneuver. It was an even race. And no one could match the Red Baron's combat skills. He was 80-0. Soon the Camel and the triplane are rushing westward down the Somme Valley, buzzing treetops and nearly hitting the church steeple at a French village called Vaux-sur-Somme. Allied squadron leader Roy Brown sees his friend under the guns of the red triplane and dives down to help. 10:58, Captain Brown fires his machine guns and sees the red triplane veer to the right. Brown pulls up and heads off to the northeast to help out another British plane. Around that same time, Australian gunners on the ground open fire on the red triplane. 11 a.m., the Baron's plane is down in a field near a chimney stack. He's still alive, but seconds after Australian troops get there, he passes away. The cause? A single bullet wound through the chest. What happened in those last 2 minutes of Manfred von Richthofen's life? Just who killed the Baron? Was it Captain Roy Brown, the brave Canadian pilot who rushed to rescue his companion in distress? In a war with few heroes, everyone wanted to believe that Roy Brown's action took down the Baron. Many want to believe it today. But Roy Brown wasn't the only one shooting at the Red Baron that day. Snowy Evans, Robert Buey, and Cedric Popkin are three unheralded machine gunners on the ground who also fired at the red triplane. Could one of these men have shot down the Red Baron? By using modern technology and a team of experts, we may finally be able to answer the question of what happened that fateful day in 1918. Before we can learn who shot down the Baron, we need to know where he landed. Historian Alan Bennett has gathered every available scrap of evidence about the Baron's last flight to pinpoint the location. It turned out that witnesses identified 4 different fields as the landing site.
There were so many contradictions and arguments. So the key seemed to be the eyewitnesses said the triplane came to a rest near a big mound of earth in the field. If I could find that mound of earth in the field, that would give us a definite answer.
Looking at aerial photos taken just a few weeks before the Baron was shot down, Bennett saw a shadow in the middle of a field on one photo. This could be the mound of earth he's looking for. Armed with his global positioning satellite unit, Alan Bennett travels to France in search of the mound. By a stroke of luck, he is helped by some long-lost local knowledge. For 30 years, Henri de Laplace was mayor of Vaux-sur-Somme, the French village near where the Baron's plane was last seen flying. In 1918, his grandfather was also mayor. He showed his grandson exactly where he saw the Baron's plane land.
Et a constaté, cet avion de Richthofen était tombé ici, à quelques mètres près, à cet endroit.
Nous avons une différence très petite.
Très petite différence.
6 mètres. We have proven something. Now we know the exact place where the triplane came to rest.
Now we know where our story ends, the time and place where the Red Baron finally came to Earth. But we need to go back in time, just 2 minutes earlier, to the moment when the first shots were fired, to reconstruct the Baron's last battle. At the time of his death in 1918, the Red Baron was a legend, a striking contrast to the anonymous soldiers in trenches. But controversy started almost immediately after the Baron was shot down. Determining who actually shot the Baron won't be easy. All the guns involved on the ground and in the air fired the same caliber bullet, a .303 rifle round. To get closer to the truth, we will retrace the Baron's last flight with the help of historian Alan Bennett.
Baron chased Lieutenant May, and Roy Brown saw what was happening, decided to descend to his rescue.
Lieutenant May, being chased by the Baron, came down the canal directly towards us. They were skimming the surface of the water. When they came to the corner, they didn't make the turn. They passed right overhead where we are, across into the distance and down to Vaux-sur-Somme. But Lieutenant May came down that street there, just above those red rooftops, came across, and over the roof of the church, just missed the church tower. The Red Baron was hot on his tail, and they disappeared in that direction over the trees.
Only at a pontoon bridge just west of Vaux-sur-Somme does anyone see any sign of a third plane diving down on the Baron.
There was a crew repairing this particular pontoon bridge, and they heard aircraft engines, and they saw the Red Baron chasing Lieutenant May. Roy Brown did not pass this spot. He turned around and he went back that way to help another pilot who was in difficulties.
Could Brown's brief diving attack have been responsible for the demise of the Red Baron? Although it never received the official endorsement of the Army, this claim became the accepted history, the history people wanted to believe.
I'm quite sure that Captain Brown shot down the Red Baron.
To see if this is the way it really happened, though, we need to recreate that final dogfight. A few planes from World War I are still flying today, but reenacting a dogfight with the intensity of that 1918 life and death struggle would be impossible with these fragile antiques. But there is another way to recreate the air battle in a flight simulator. Michael Selig and Brian Fuse are skilled pilots, engineers, and writers of commercial-grade flight simulator software. To help solve this mystery, they will rebuild the planes flown in the battle inside a sophisticated computer.
What's really important is that the pilot has the real challenges that they had back in World War I. And that's just on the aerodynamic side. And then there's also the gun side.
We'll calculate the aerodynamic forces on it,
we'll deal with the vibration effects, and as we do that, we'll actually check for where those rounds are hitting.
Hitting someone with a machine gun fixed to the cowling of a vibrating, wind-buffeted aircraft is no easy task. And the Aces had one secret for success.
In actual combat, typically you'd want to get right on the guy's tail,
right.
from 30 feet.
Right.
When Roy Brown attacked the Baron, the odds were against his scoring a hit. He got the sun behind him as he dived down at full throttle, probably reaching 180 miles an hour before he opened fire from about 1,000 feet away. He never got close enough to be sure of his aim. In addition to the great distance, Roy Brown's shot would have had to overcome the shaking of his own plane. The 150 horsepower of his engine makes for a very unstable gun platform. Just how unstable soon became clear to our investigators. By mounting a laser pointer on the cowling of an antique Camel, we can see how the engine's vibration would deflect a shot.
So this thing vibrates, shakes, there's the laser light. Okay.
It looks like what we've got going here is that as we're applying power, we're getting a sweeping motion. But what we can see from this is when he holds the power in briefly, you can see that it's going over about a 2-inch dispersion.
Combining the gun's natural scatter with the engine's vibration makes targeting difficult. Add in the aerodynamics, or how the plane moves through the air, and hitting what you aim at becomes even harder. Taking all this into account, we're ready to relive the final flight of the Red Baron. In the simulation, every 7th bullet we fire will be a glowing tracer round to help us see the firing path. But every single bullet will be tracked to see if it passes through the imaginary boxes around the Baron. The computer will fly Lieutenant May's plane on a pre-programmed course. Pilot Selig will fly the Baron's red triplane, and Pilot Fuse will make Roy Brown's dive.
Okay, fellas, this is the mission. And
the simulation will pick up the action with Brown at 5,000 feet, just as he's about to dive to May's rescue.
And so we'd like you to come as close as you can to flying this mission. Do you think that's possible?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's get started.
All right. Begin.
And that's Brown flying up there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what's your altitude right now?
2,100 feet.
Okay. And there's the Somme River down below, and you can see the little village of Vaux-sur-Somme coming into view. This is really amazing. Look at that. And there's the church. Wow, whoa. There's the near miss. And Brown is now coming down for the attack.
Yep. 1,300 feet.
Boy, look at that up there. It's like I'm in the cockpit.
And I'm going to make my attack run now. Get in my sight. It's hard to do.
Okay, there's tracers.
And you're banking away. Boy, that was quick. That's the end of the mission, fellas.
Brown's high-speed attack is over in just a few seconds. The Baron diverts to the right after seeing tracers zoom by him, exactly what had happened in 1918. But did Brown hit anything?
How'd you do?
Not too good. We didn't seem to score any hits this time.
In 5 separate runs, our simulated Roy Brown failed to get a single hit on the Baron. If the simulation is accurate, it would have been almost impossible for Brown to have hit the Red Baron. But could he have simply gotten lucky? There's one way to find out. We can check the 1918 autopsy report. It indicates that the Baron was hit on his right side and describes the extent of his injuries. An examination of these records concludes that someone with his injuries would only have about a minute to live. This is where the timeline becomes critical, and Roy Brown's plane falls apart. After Brown's attack at 10:58 and the Baron swerved to the right, the triplane does not head straight to the crash site. Instead, it flew over the gun of Australian infantry gunner Cedric Popkin about 30 seconds later. About 30 seconds after that, it flew over the guns of two more Australians, Buey and Evans, sitting behind a ridge. If the Baron had been hit by Brown, he'd have been unconscious by now, but instead, he turned and headed back for home, making one more turn before the emergency landing in the field near the chimney stack. 11 a.m., nearly 2 minutes since Brown's attack. Australian soldiers, Ted Smout among them, arrived at his plane, and the Red Baron was still alive.
Got him out on the ground, and he just said one word, kaput, and died.
Had Brown's bullet hit the Baron with the shot that test after test proved impossible, he would have passed away long before Smout got to him. The evidence is now overwhelming. The most famous warrior in the world in 1918 was killed by an ordinary soldier on the ground. But which one of them was it? Can we put a name and a face on the man who fired a shot that would echo through history? The bullet that hit the Red Baron was probably fired from up to half a mile away. But who fired it? Historian Alan Bennett may lead us to the answer. His methodical studies of the eyewitness reports have given us a short list of gunners, those who had a chance of firing a shot that could have hit the Baron in his right torso.
The Baron passed over Popkin, but Popkin fired at him from behind, so that eliminates Popkin there. As he approached the 53rd Battery, Buey and Evans fired frontally, so they could not have hit him from the right. When the Baron made his U-turn, he then put his right wing towards Evans, and we know Evans fired at some time in this process. The Baron then approached Sergeant Popkin again, who opened fire once more from the right.
Both Evans and Popkin had a shot on the Baron's right flank at a range of 600 to 800 yards. And remember, the Australian gunners didn't have the luxury of a stationary target. Theirs was flying at 100 miles an hour. Could a bullet fired from the ground have hit the Baron's plane at the right angle to create the wound found in the autopsy? To put the theory to the test, we needed a way to duplicate the soldier's shots without risking a plane or a pilot. For the experiment, the gun will be this high-output laser programmed by experts Lawrence Ryan and Steve Harvey. The location is obvious, the same place the mystery shot was fired in 1918. First Sergeant Popkin's position. We were faced with one technical difficulty. A bullet takes crucial fractions of a second to strike a target at this range, but the laser beam travels almost instantaneously. So to recreate that time delay, the programming will deflect the angle of the laser so that the sharpshooter has to aim ahead of his target. Rather than firing a constant beam, the laser will send out 7 short pulses each second. Each pulse represents a bullet. The laser scatters these bullets in just the same way the Lewis gun would.
Well, here's the map of the flight.
Alan Bennett briefs the pilots on the route their plane should fly, as close as possible to the Red Baron's final flight. Sharpshooter Mike Yardley dons a pair of goggles that cuts all green light from his vision.
As I pass the glasses into the beam, it is completely stopped, and nothing appears on the ground behind. Therefore, we shall make you wear these glasses whilst you're aiming at the plane, so that you can't see the laser, which would obviously help you significantly.
These pilots are about to fly back to 1918. To make sure the laser hits on the plane are clearly visible, the experiment begins as night falls. Firing at the plane from behind is just a warm-up because Popkin never claimed any of his bullets hit there. The real test is the long-range shot coming up as the plane comes back heading for home.
Here he comes. Running. Okay, and fire! You guys in.
In 11 seconds of firing, Yardley hits the plane 20 times. Half the hits are right on the cockpit.
I've shot just about everything there is to shoot over the years, but never a contraption like this. And I think we showed tonight that we could have shot down the Red Baron.
It seems clear that Sergeant Popkin could have shot von Richthofen. But there is still another man in the running, and now it's time to give him his best shot at immortality. Just as in 1918, a small plane crests a ridge and a sharpshooter waits for his moment to strike. Snowy Evans was the last machine gunner to fire at the Baron. He first fired as the Baron approached him. Sharpshooter Mike Yardley takes the same opportunity.
Okay, fire!
And gets a few hits. There's no way these short-range frontal shots hit the Baron, but he probably saw tracer bullets whizzing by. He turned for home and exposed his right flank to Gunner Evans. Will Yardley make the shot with the laser?
7 foot lead, fire! Decker, 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 Decker. Did we hit him? No.
Yardley missed, but our sharpshooter isn't ready to give up. He orders the plane to loop around for another run.
Right, coming round to the left. Here we go.
If he can make the shot, then his 1918 counterpart, Gunner Snowy Evans, could have made the shot as well.
Okay. Decker, 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 Decker. Hit.
Right, cool. Cease firing.
That's good.
That's interesting because that one shot could have been the one shot that killed the Red Baron, couldn't it?
It's at the angle, yeah.
Yeah, and that was just the angle, wasn't it? Right-hand side bullet entry, left-hand side bullet exit.
Our experiment shows that both Popkin and Evans could have fired the long-range shot that brought down the Red Baron. But who actually pulled the trigger? Our mystery may finally find its solution, not in the fields of France, but in Alan Bennett's treasure trove of papers. Bennett re-examined the archives, and in one document, he may have found the pivotal evidence we've been looking for. In 1935, Sergeant Popkin wrote a letter to the official Australian war historian describing exactly what had happened. He attached a sketch map, a map that had been lost for 70 years. Popkin actually fired only between these two X's when the Baron was exposing not his right side, but his front.
Sergeant Popkin says as the triplane was heading towards him and he was firing at it, it suddenly jerked. And he believed that he had hit the pilot at that time. But Popkin was firing frontally at the triplane, so it doesn't look as though he did.
By his own admission, Sergeant Popkin eliminated himself from the running. Of all the people claiming to have shot down the Baron, Brown, Popkin, Buey, the only one left is Snowy Evans. Not a single photograph of this man exists, a man who had no children and was a drifter in 1925. Was this the man who shot the Red Baron? If so, like millions of his fellow soldiers in the Great War, he has long since passed into history.
We don't have the gun. We don't have the bullet. We don't have the evidence to cement this case. All we know is that Captain Brown was not the one that shot down the Red Baron. It was the Australian infantryman.
It is ironic that the man who killed the Red Baron may never even have known that he brought a legend crashing to Earth. Although air combat didn't have a major impact on the war that was raging on the ground, for the ordinary troops who fought in the mud of the trenches, the demise of the Red Baron was a great victory.
He was filled with a sense of invincibility. He totally disregarded his own rules, never to attack alone. This was the mistake.
April 21st, 1918, a day when a common soldier brought down a flying legend. Did you know one battle on the Western Front, the Battle of Somme, lasted for 5 months? When it was all over, there were more than 1 million German, French, and British casualties, and the Allies had only gained about 7 miles of territory.
Near the end of World War I, the huge casualties, ruined cities, and shortages of food and fuel had exhausted and angered many of the Russian people. Revolution was in the air.
Have you ever revolted against the rules?
One time I had a party while my parents were not home, and I knew it was wrong, but I did it anyway.
One of the rules here is that your skirt has to be longer, or at least the same length as your fingertips when you put them at your side.
Well, we have this rule, flip-flop rule, not exactly called that, basically preventing us from wearing flip-flops to school.
But my arms are really long, so I usually break that rule because my skirts just don't come that far.
I think it's ridiculous that a school could believe that certain types of footwear can stop you from getting work done or taking tests and learning.
Well, I've broken the provisional license rule because I'm only 17 and I'm only supposed to drive with one person in the car. And there's been a situation where my friends have needed rides and they were in a place where they'd be stuck there for the night and there was nowhere to get them.
I think that if I believe that I'm doing something right, it's okay to go ahead and do it.
When World War I started in 1914, Russians were filled with national pride and united against a common enemy, Germany. But the war would drag on for 4 years, and with each year, the Russian casualties grow. Factories cannot produce enough goods for the war effort. The transportation system breaks down. Soldiers on the front lines run out of supplies. By 1915, many soldiers have no rifles or ammunition. The war is bleeding the country dry. The people begin to question the competency of the Russian generals leading the war. In 1917, in an effort to boost morale, Tsar Nicholas II personally takes command of the troops at the front. But he proves to be no more competent than his generals, and the casualties keep mounting. People are especially angered that in his absence, the Tsar's wife Alexandra is running the country. Many Russians distrust and fear Alexandra because she was born in Germany. In March 1917, workers in St. Petersburg, renamed Petrograd during the war, go on strike. Continued losses on the front lines and shortages of food and fuel at home bring the Tsarist monarchy to collapse. How did the revolution start? Marchers take to the streets shouting, "Bread, bread!" Hunger has turned to anger. Crowds break into food shops throughout the city. Revolution is imminent. But this time, the Tsar's troops do not fire on the crowds. They join them. This uprising would come to be called the February Revolution. With the troops refusing to fight the demonstrators, the government is left helpless. Finally, the Tsar steps down. Crowds cheer as the Duma, the Russian parliament, sets up a temporary government. But this government decides to continue the unpopular war with Germany. It is a big mistake. Most Russians are tired of the war, and they start to take matters into their own hands. Groups opposed to the war form Soviets, or councils of workers and soldiers. While the Soviets try to work with the new government, the Bolsheviks quickly take charge. Who are the Bolsheviks? The Bolsheviks are a revolutionary party made up of radical socialists and are led by Vladimir Lenin. He promises the Russian people peace, land, and bread. In November 1917, Lenin and his Red Guards, made up of armed factory workers and sailors, attacked the provisional government in Petrograd. In a matter of days, Lenin's forces have won. They quickly seize power in other cities. For the next 3 years, the Bolsheviks and their Red Army will fight a civil war with the White Army, the counter-revolutionary forces still loyal to the Tsar. When the battles end in 1921, Lenin and the Bolsheviks are victorious. But they, like so many others following the Great War, inherit a nation in ruins.
You've been given all the information. Now it's your turn to discuss the questions. Take a moment to talk about the following.
How do the feelings of the people back home affect a country's war effort?
How did the war contribute to instability in some countries?
We hope you've enjoyed this assignment discovery look back at World War I and its aftermath. If you'd like to learn more about what you've just seen, go online or check out these books at your local library.